Looking for ways to nurture leads without all the manual work of remembering to follow up with them and track their status in your sales pipeline? I've got the perfect solution that will streamline and automate your sales process without having to pay for any expensive sales sequencing software. I'm Courtney 𝗪𝗧𝗥𝗡, a tech and automation specialist passionate about helping service providers build thriving businesses while reclaiming their time. In this video, I'm going to show you a real-life example of how I help one of my clients automate her sales sequence using a combination of Wealthbox CRM workflows and Zapier, completely eliminating the mental burden of manually tracking her sales tasks while ensuring no leads slip through the cracks of her pipeline. First, let me give you some context around my client's situation and why she needed an automated sales sequence in the first place. My client is a financial planner who had signed up for a lead generation service to help her grow her business. While this was great for bringing in new prospects, it also created the challenge of having to manually manage all of these leads and follow up with them in a timely manner. She needed a way to track and manage the series of calls and emails she needed to make in order to nurture these leads through her sales pipeline. Ideally, she wanted this sequence visible in her CRM Wealthbox because she was already using Wealthbox workflows for some of her other client tasks, and she wanted to be able to track each lead's progress and status from there. She also wanted to automate the sending of the emails so that she only had to worry about making the calls manually. But automating the emails required us to design the automation in such a way that my client could easily make changes to it down the road. Now, previously, my client had used an email sequencing tool called 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪, which offered the functionality she needed, but she preferred to not have to pay a monthly subscription fee. She was looking for a more cost-effective solution to nurture her leads. But most importantly, her primary goal was to save time and reduce the mental burden of manually tracking follow-ups. As a really busy financial planner, she knew she couldn't remember every single touch point of her sales sequence without any kind of system to track and manage everything. And she couldn't afford to let the leads that she paid for go cold. My client knew that if she could streamline this process and automate the email follow-ups, she could focus more on growing the business and providing exceptional financial planning services to her clients. To address all of my clients' needs, we implemented a two-part strategy using Wealthbox CRM and Zapier. First, we created a workflow in Wealthbox to serve as the foundation for her sales sequence. This workflow provides my client the visibility and adaptability she needs. Each step in the sequence, from initial lead capture to the final follow-up email, is mapped out as a step in this Wealthbox workflow. The beauty of using a Wealthbox workflow is that my client can easily change the email content within steps, modify the templates by adding or deleting steps, or even rearrange the order of the steps. Whatever changes she needs to make to the sequence, the automation will adapt seamlessly. This flexibility ensures that she can continuously optimize her sales sequence based on performance data or changing business needs. The second part of the strategy involved using Zapier to automate the email steps and track whether leads have scheduled an intro call. We needed to ensure that the sequence immediately stops as soon as the lead schedules this call because that was the ultimate goal of the sales sequence. We decided to use Zapier to automate the emails separately from her CRM for two key reasons. Number one, Wealthbox doesn't have the capability to automate the sending of emails natively. While some CRMs do offer this, in this case, we had to work with the limitations of the CRM she was already using. And number two, since we wanted the sequence itself to live inside Wealthbox for visibility, we needed a way to send those emails externally, but at the same timings as the Wealthbox workflow sequence. Zapier was the best way to accomplish this because we could trigger Zapier to send the email when the previous step in the workflow was completed. Then Zapier can delay a certain number of days before sending the email, which allows us to mimic the timing of the workflow sequence. By separating the email automation from the workflow management, we could leverage the strengths of each tool. Wealthbox provides the ideal platform for my client to visually map out and adapt her sales sequence, while Zapier can handle the heavy lifting of actually sending the emails and tracking lead actions. This automation eliminates the need for my client to manually track and manage the follow-up process. She no longer has to worry about accidentally calling or emailing a lead who had already scheduled an intro call with her. which not only saves her valuable time, but also ensures a smooth and professional client experience. Have you ever tried a sequence like this in your sales process? Did you struggle with managing and tracking all of the tasks involved? Leave a comment below and let me know what your experience has been like. Let's go ahead and dive into the workflow diagram that I created for this automation. So the very first step is in Zapier. Whenever my client receives a lead email from the lead generation service that she's using, it will then create the contact in Wealthbox, and it will tag the contact with this particular tag that will allow the rest of the automation to detect whether a prospect came from this lead gen service or not. Then it will start the workflow in Wealthbox. This workflow lives in Wealthbox, and it has the series of steps that it will do for the entire sequence. So first it will do an email step, and then a call, and then another email, and then another call, another email, another call, and then the last two steps are just email steps. So this whole sequence was designed by my client, and it's completely customized to what she wanted to do. And the great part is, since this lives in Wealthbox, she is able to easily modify these steps and reorder them. If she only wants to do 2 calls, she can just delete this third call within her Wealthbox workflow, and the automation will just adapt to that. The next part that happens is after it starts this workflow, it will check to make sure that the next active step is going to be an email step. And if so, then it will go ahead and send that email, and then it will mark that step as complete. Then, whenever a workflow step is completed, it will trigger another automation in Zapier, because when she is doing these manual call steps, once she marks that step as completed, that's how Zapier knows to send the next email, if the next step is an email step. So it will first check to make sure that the current active step is an email. If it is, then it will delay the number of days that it needs to before it needs to send that email. So in this workflow, first an email will send, and then within the same day or 2 days, she will make a call. But then after that, she wants it to wait a number of days, either 5 days or 10 days. It will delay in Zapier. And then once it does the delay, it needs to check to make sure that the workflow is still active, because what if the prospect had scheduled an intro call within this delay? The whole goal of the automation is for the lead to schedule that intro call, or for them to answer the call and talk to my client, the financial planner. So when they answer the call and they talk with my client will then mark the workflow as complete manually. Or if they schedule an intro call, there is another automation down here that will find the workflow and complete it. So Zapier is always checking to make sure that whenever the lead schedules that intro call, it will complete the workflow, so that back up here, if the workflow has been completed, it will not send that email. It will stop. Otherwise, if the workflow is still active, that means they haven't scheduled a call and they haven't answered the phone, it knows to send the next email, and then it marks that step as complete. So you can see how this automation is adaptable, and it will always work no matter how my client changes this sequence, because every time a step is completed in this workflow, it will check the next step, whether it's an email or not. And if it is, then it will wait the number of days that it needs to based on the timing of the workflow before it sends that email. So it will always be in sync with the original sequence, and it will always send the email content that is in that step as well. And I will show you how that's broken down so that my client can actually adjust the email content within this workflow, which will modify the content that actually gets sent out to the client. Here's how the workflow looks inside the CRM. We have a sequence of emails and calls over here, and within each of these steps, you have the actual email content that will end up going out to the lead. So my client can easily just change and modify this content before the email actually goes out, and she can modify the template very easily and whatever changes she wants to make. The automation will use whatever content is right here. And then each of these steps have two outcomes that when she completes the step manually for the calls, they either didn't answer, in which case the workflow will proceed, or they did answer and then she will complete the workflow manually. So any of these email steps that get sent out by Zapier, Zapier knows to complete the workflow as soon as that intro call gets scheduled so that it doesn't keep going and so that my client doesn't accidentally make any calls for a lead that has already scheduled with her. In Zapier, this is the automation that will trigger whenever that email comes into her inbox, notifying that she has a new lead from this lead generation service. So it will trigger when that email comes in. It will parse all of the email details with the client's name and their contact information. It will add them to her Wealthbox CRM, and it will start that Wealthbox workflow that I just showed you. Then it will check to make sure that the next step is an email step, just in case my client changes that down the road. If the first step is an email step, it will retrieve the subject line from the workflow step, which I put in the title of the step, and then it will replace the name. So each of these, I just put this as an indication of where their first name should go, so that Zapier knows to put their first name there. Then it will send that email to the client and it will mark that workflow step as complete, which will then trigger this automation, which is also in Zapier, and it will only proceed if they are actually in that particular sales sequence. Then it will again check to make sure that the next step is an email task, and if it is, it will delay by the certain number of days from that workflow. Unfortunately, the workflow in Wealthbox does return the number of days that it's supposed to delay, so we are able to use that in this step here. Then it will again get that workflow just to make sure that the workflow is still active, because if it isn't active, that means it was either manually completed by my client because they answered the call, or it was completed by Zapier when they scheduled an intro call. Then it will get the subject from the email task, it will replace their name, and it will send the email, and then it will complete the workflow step. And the final part is when they schedule that intro call in Calendly. We already had this set up to complete a few other automations when they schedule that call, but at the very end here, I did add a step to complete that sales sequence so that they will automatically stop and they won't receive any more emails. So what did you think of this example of an automated sales sequence using nothing but CRM workflows and Zapier? Does it make you want to streamline your own sales processes? If so, feel free to book a free consultation call with me to discuss your needs and strategize some automations for smoother sales operations. I will see you in the next video.